Hi, I'm Lisa Fletcher, and you're in the stream. Today, how far will Vietnam go to keep the government's voice the only voice? Today, we'll look at the consequences of free speech in a country that's throwing bloggers and citizen journalists in jail. Our digital producer, Malika Bilal, here looking out for all your live feedback. Tweet her using the hashtag AJStream. Malika, there's good internet penetration in Vietnam, about 34% of the folks there on the internet, but, and rightfully so, a lot of them afraid to engage in today's topic online.
Right, that's something that we're finding, and we're also hearing from members of the Vietnamese in the diaspora who are reaching out with these impassioned pleas in solidarity. Here's one video comment from one such person.
Hi, my name is Thuy from Washington, D.C. I just want to say that it hurts me to know that the next 5 to 18 years, when I'm trying to reach my potential, that these Vietnamese activists will never have that chance because their potential won't make it past the walls of a prison cell or the houses that they'll be confined to. But I want them to know that they're not alone, that the revolutionary spirits and voices are heard and have touched the hearts and minds of the Vietnamese diaspora, and that we're in this together.
Whether you're in Vietnam or elsewhere, we want you to join the conversation, so use the hashtag AJStream.
All right. Seated next to Malika is Nguyen Bic. He is a board member of the National Congress of Vietnamese Americans and was formerly the director of Radio Free Asia's Vietnamese news service. Bic, thanks for being here today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, we're looking forward to hearing what you've got to say, and we're also looking forward to hearing from you. You can contribute your comments, your questions, and even suggest a future show topic on our Facebook page. Just like us at facebook.com/AJStream, and you too can be in the stream.
Hi, I'm Atyaf Al-Wazir. I'm a blogger and co-founder of Support Yemen, and I'm in the stream.
A crackdown against anti-government activists in Vietnam is intensifying, according to various human rights groups. Last week, 14 dissidents were given prison sentences of up to 13 years for subversion and crimes against the state. Vietnamese authorities say the activists were attempting to overthrow the government. Now, according to the Committee to Protect Journalists, at least 5 of those recently sentenced were independent bloggers. Advocates for internet free speech say this is part of an ongoing campaign to silence citizen journalists and other forms of online dissent. In Vietnam, the internet has become an essential source for people seeking information beyond what's reported in state media outlets. So, what are the limits of free speech in Vietnam? And in what ways can online activism change Vietnamese civil society? To help us answer these questions is Diem Do, chairman of Viet Thanh, or the Vietnam Reform Party. That is a U.S.-based group which calls for democratic reform in Vietnam. And joining us via Skype from San Francisco is Ava Galperin. She works for the Electronic Frontier Foundation, where she has been writing about internet freedom and freedom of expression in Vietnam. Ava, Diem, welcome to you both.
Hi there.
Thank you for having me.
You bet. Now, we want to mention that we asked representatives of the Vietnamese government to participate in today's discussion, and they declined to comment on any of these issues. Diem, I want to start with you. 14 people sentenced to prison for various things, including being affiliated with your organization. Some are going away for more than a dozen years. Who are they, and what were they doing to be convicted of subversion?
Yes, most of these people are very young people. Their age range from about early 20s to 40s. The majority of them are bloggers. They have written online articles critical of the government, whether it's on the freedom of speech, freedom of religion, or sometimes on just social issue like corruption, and also about how the Vietnamese government is handling the aggression from China. So, like I said, the majority of them are bloggers who have written articles as such. Now, the accusation against them by the government is basically based on the fact that some of them have attended training classes conducted by Viet Thanh, my organization. And these classes or training was on nonviolent techniques, on internet security, on leadership skills, and so on. So these are the kind of things that they have been engaged in, which is very, not safe, nonviolent in nature, and yet the government deemed that as subversive, and so that's the accusation against them.
So Ava Galperin, I want to go to you. Why now? What do you make of the timing of all of this?
Well, this is really part of a much broader crackdown on bloggers and dissidents, which has been happening in Vietnam for about the last year and a half to 2 years. And it's involved both the arrest and trial of bloggers who have been critical of the government, as well as bloggers who have reported on police corruption, and also some media reform, which has really cracked down on free speech online and instituted new censorship.
So, Bick, this trial is a little unusual because in the past the government has had a tendency to go after individuals that they see as enemies of the state. And this is one of the first times that they've really gone after a cohesive group. Is there anything to read into that they've...
Well, I think the government is particularly afraid of any kind of form of organization because they see that as threatening them. So they gave Liu Kai 13 years after they already put him in jail for 3 years and kept him for more 10 months and then gave him another 13 years in prison. It's because Liu Kai created the Club of Free Vietnamese Journalists. That includes only 7 people, but the government is afraid that that thing would spread. Now, in the case of Viet Tân, or actually not all of these people that were given tough sentences just a couple of days ago belong to Viet Tân for that matter. In fact, even the government say that they could have clear evidence only of 3 cases of belonging to Viet Tân. The rest of them may have taken some workshop training with Viet Tân, with some other groups that believe in non-violent opposition. And so that hardly is something that is threatening to the government. Mm-hmm. But nonetheless, they see the beginning of some kind of organization. That's how they come out very, very severely. Yeah.
Well, netizens here are chiming in with tweets of surprise. Nashas, this is interesting. I didn't even realize there was such a thing happening here. Tourists don't see this. But Diem, I want you to comment on this next one. There's a tweet from Din who says, most Vietnamese people are too scared or apathetic to engage politically. That will soon change with the vanguard of activists. And one of those activists, or the son of one of those activists, left us a video comment. Have a listen.
Hi, Al Jazeera. My name is Kwan Nguyen from Davis, California. My father is Nguyen Quoc Nguyen, and he is a human rights activist and an American citizen currently being detained in Vietnam. His court date is coming up in 1 week, and my question is, if my father is to receive a very long sentence for something that is considered a natural right in most countries, how would the international community, especially the American government, react? And what can we do to speed up his release? Thank you.
So, Jim, I wonder if you could speak to that. What can the international community do as per that question? But also, what is his definition of anti-state behavior, as his son calls what he was doing was a natural right?
Well, in Vietnam, there's no political freedom. Anyone who engage in activities that call for basic human rights, that call for democratic rule, are deemed to be anti-government. And so the definition is very broad and loose by the Vietnamese government. They have used Article 79, Article 88 in the Penal Code as justification to lock away people for simply doing what we consider to be very normal civil activities here, by our standard. Now, Dr. Nguyen Quoc Nguyen, who is a member of Viet Tân, his trial is coming up on January 22nd, and he was arrested simply just by coming back to Vietnam, and he was arrested on site at the airport without having done anything yet. And yet he is being brought to trial next week with charge of anti-government activities and subversive. So that's the kind of situation that we're seeing right now in Vietnam. I just want to point out also that the trial of the 14 bloggers that you just mentioned a while ago was met with unprecedented international reaction and pressure. The international community really banded together and voiced very strong opposition against the sentences that were handed down to these people. Even the UN waded in and issued a statement condemning the trial. So with all of that's going on right now, I really hope that the international community will keep up the pressure, will increase pressure, if you will, on the Vietnamese government so that we can hopefully see some improvement in the future, and especially, hopefully, we'll see the release of some of these people who have been locked up by the Vietnamese government.
Ava, give us a sense of what kinds of stories these people are telling. What are the stories that are being suppressed by the government?
Well, as Viet Thanh has mentioned, there have definitely been calls for political reform. There have been calls for work against corruption. There have been people who are simply speaking their minds about the political situation. All of these things have resulted in very harsh jail sentences for bloggers and political activists across Vietnam.
Can I add something?
Sure.
The government itself, through its party Congress, admitted that the corruption is a bad problem in Vietnam. But the government can talk about that. If you talk about that, you become anti-government. So it's very weird, yeah.
Well, apparently Viet Thanh is considered a terrorist organization by Hanoi, but Hanoi itself will say, when we arrest these folks, we don't find them with weapons, we find them with cameras and books.
That's right. Yeah.
It's insane.
Well, there's a couple of tweets here talking about the Chinese model. People are saying that Vietnam is opening up economically. Gwendy says if they can follow the Chinese model, a big probability that they can replicate the same economic path. I'd like you to talk about that Chinese model. Have a listen to this video comment that's in the same vein.
Bien, and I'm from California. If the recent crackdown on free expression in Vietnam is not evidence enough that the opening up of Vietnam's economy will not necessarily lead to free expression, then the several similar cases of different countries, both in history and in the present, allude to the reality that open economies do not necessitate open societies. Something's got to give, some action must be taken in order to secure free expression in Vietnam or any other country.
So, Vic, if they're opening up economically, will this necessarily mean that freedom of expression will follow?
No, unfortunately, we have seen this, two things going parallel. In fact, the more the economy is open, the more severe the government comes down on the bloggers. Yeah, because with some freedom, people can associate with one another. And as I said, the government is very, very, very much afraid of any kind of form of association or partying. They even had a decree against the assembly of more than 5 people.
But getting back to the question of international pressure, don't you think that gives the international community more of an opportunity to apply pressure economically as they open up economically?
That's what I've been, advocating.
Yeah.
I said that the only way to eliminate, you cannot eliminate, but alleviate the situation is probably for the international community to apply some sanction, because the communist government only understands something that's very concrete, in which they lose something for doing these things. Yeah.
So, Ava, I want to get to this idea of proposed legislation in Vietnam that could have a really big effect on internet usage there. Some of the things they're talking about requiring are real name ID online, legal liability for websites failing to regulate content, filtering of what they call offensive content, and then there are all these vague descriptions of what constitutes undermining national unity. Where does this legislation stand right now?
Last year, the Vietnamese government proposed a decree which would have very seriously affected freedom of speech on the internet in Vietnam. And it would have prohibited a long list of acts of free expression, including abusing the provision and use of the internet and information on the web to oppose the Socialist Republic of Vietnam, undermining the grand unity of all people, and undermining the fine customs and traditions of the nation. Additionally, one of the things they really wanted to do in the original draft of the decree was to create liability for a wide range of intermediaries, including domain name registrars, ISPs, social networks, and individual blogs that just have comment sections, making them liable for the things that other people post on their sites. And they wanted to require foreign companies to open up offices in Vietnam, which would make them which would make them vulnerable to Vietnamese legal jurisdiction.
Foreign companies like Google,
stuff
right?
Was struck from the decree, but a lot of the language around abusing the internet is really still there.
Well, DM, some of the things that Ava just mentioned, our community is also mentioning. Din on Twitter says, Vietnam government is known for waging hacker attacks against websites and shutting up bloggers with long jail sentences. Another tweet here from your organization, Vietnam tried to block Facebook in 2009. That surely didn't work because people learned to circumvent. And someone chimes in from Thailand saying the same thing happened here in Thailand. Most web-savvy users know their ways around it. But can you tell us about the media landscape? Where are people getting their news?
Well, right now, the people still rely heavily on the internet to get the news that has been filtered by the government. You have to be aware that the Vietnamese government control all of the official news media outlets in Vietnam. Radio, TV, printed paper, everything is under government's control, directly or indirectly. So the internet is really the only relatively free space that people can still have access to. I also want to add a comment about the Chinese model that the Vietnamese government is trying to copy. We all have seen clearly that opening up the economy will not necessarily lead to more human rights or freedom. However, the question is, can the Vietnamese really copy the Chinese? And my answer is that I don't think they can. They lack the political clout. They lack the economic muscle to copy what the Chinese is doing. And one more point I would like to bring to your attention is that the fact that they have increased or stepped up crackdown during the last couple of years is a clear sign that they are facing internal strife. They are facing tremendous problems. You have to be aware of the fact that the top leadership of the Vietnamese Communist Party is going through significant division. There's huge infighting between the president and the prime minister. It's a known fact that the communist leadership is fighting each other. Social discontent is very, very high in Vietnam right now. People are angry, people are upset. Political demands for political reform has been increasing during the last 5 years. So if you take all of that into context, the picture in Vietnam is quite clear. The Communist Party is in trouble, and they are reacting by cracking down on dissent.
Vic, 34% of Vietnamese now are on the internet. In 2000, it was 0.3%. Right. Can this government that is divided, that Diem is talking about, can it keep up with that rate of growth and the pace of technology?
They try their very best, but let me give you some figures. They have 20,000 so-called internet police force. They go to internet cafe, they stand behind you, they watch what you say, and right away they can arrest you. They firewall at least 6,000 websites in the diaspora. Their own police generals brag about the fact that they destroyed the 320 websites from abroad. One particular online publication, Chim Viet, which was published in Poland last January, was attacked by 160 million attacks during a couple of weeks. So it's just incredible how they try to fight against that. But all of that, as Diem Do has said, people have a way to go around it. They know how to surmount the firewall, and in many ways we can still communicate with one another very well.
Ava, I know you want to jump in here.
Yes, I just had a couple of points to make. The first is that outside economic clout is very important, and there's some evidence that it does work. For example, Vietnam did have to back down on their attempt to create intermediary liability for foreign companies whose services are reachable in Vietnam, like Google and Twitter and Facebook. Furthermore, EFF has a lot of resources to help people who are interested in both censorship circumvention technology, but also in making sure that their sites stay up in case of distributive denial of service attack. We have a guide for users, which is available in Vietnamese, called Keeping Your Site Alive, which is available on our website, www.eff.org.
Great, and we'll definitely tweet that out. But it's interesting you said that. We have a video comment from some people asking what they can do. Have a listen.
As Vietnamese youths, we're concerned about the youth activists who are currently detained and have faced sham trials.
We hope to help these Vietnamese youth activists, along with other bloggers and citizen journalists who have been unjustly detained.
What can youths outside of Vietnam do to support the cause?
And what impact can this have in Vietnam?
Why don't you address that? What can those in the diaspora do?
Yes. I assume the question was for me. Yeah, there are a lot. Everyone can help. First of all, is to contact your elected official, your government official, and ask for the kind of pressure, the kind of demands for human rights respect that the Vietnamese government must allow the Vietnamese people. You have to keep in mind that because the Vietnamese economy is going downhill during the last 4 or 5 years, and they are really in trouble right now. If you look closely at the Vietnamese economy, all of the indicators clearly point to the fact that they are facing tremendous problems. So international pressure more than ever will work at this point in time. So I think the most obvious thing to do is to lobby for international support, to lobby your government for pressure on the Vietnamese government. And of course, the news media can also help tremendously by simply giving more attention to what's going on inside Vietnam, painted a balanced picture about what's going on inside Vietnam. Not everything is rosy in Vietnam, and so that's what needs to be done.
You know, that's interesting. We've seen that a lot on Twitter today. In fact, I think you read a tweet from one of our viewers saying, I didn't even know this was happening. Right. I've heard that just around our building today when I tell people what the show topic is.
Right.
Ava, we've got about a minute left, and I want to hear your thoughts on the pathway forward here.
Well, there are a couple of things that people can do. Certainly in the United States, I strongly recommend paying close attention to the U.S. Congress, which some members of Congress have written to the U.S. ambassador to Vietnam, asking him to speak out about these issues. The U.S. State Department has spoken out about these issues. Furthermore, I would ask people who are part of the diaspora to be very aware of good security and privacy practices online when communicating with their friends inside of Vietnam in order to help protect them from surveillance.
All right. We're going to keep this conversation going, and you're going to jump in, Vic, when we come back. Yeah. And to hear all of it, just log on to stream.aljazeera.com. But before we go, we do want to hit a couple of other stories that Malika's been following.
Residents of the UK will soon be able to pay their bills on the go with a new pay-by-text message service. The project will link virtually all UK bank accounts with a mobile phone number, making money transfer as easy as texting. That's according to the UK Payments Council, which is launching the initiative. But as we covered on the show last week, this low-tech revolution is nothing new. Sunny from Kenya tweets, "Here's something. The UK will catch up with Kenya by 2013. Applause." He references M-Pesa, shown here, a popular mobile banking initiative that's been in use in Kenya since 2007. Our next leads from Israel, where a group of voters is using Facebook to stage what they call an act of electoral rebellion ahead of next week's polls. The page Real Democracy pairs Israeli citizens who are looking to give up their vote with Palestinians who want a say in the outcome. And our last lead comes from the US, where last week the government denied a petition for construction of a functional Death Star from the Star Wars movie series. Why would we spend countless taxpayer dollars on a Death Star with a fundamental flaw that can be exploited by a one-man starship, said the Obama administration spokesperson. Well, following the rejection, the Empire struck back on the official Star Wars blog, calling the refusal an act of cowardice. Their response, however, ended on a defensive tone. Emissaries of the Emperor also cautioned the Galactic Senate not to believe Earth's exaggerated claims of there being a weakness in the Death Star design. Well, do you have thoughts on today's leads? Send them to us. Use the hashtag AJStream. Lisa?
I have thoughts. I'll be sending them to you.
Are you a Star Wars fan?
Yeah. Hey, stay with us. The Post Show is next at stream.aljazeera.com. Now, tomorrow's program, unpaid internships. We've all been there. Is it an unfair practice or a time-honored tradition? Tweet us your questions and your thoughts on that. And until then, we'll see you online. Welcome back. This is the Post Show at stream.aljazeera.com. You know that because you're here. We're talking about free speech in Vietnam and the government's crackdown on activists and bloggers. I want to get back into the conversation, and we were talking to our guests about the pathway forward, given the amount of censorship in Vietnam. And Winbick, I want to start with you because I know you had some thoughts on that.
Well, I'd say I'd like to enlist the American mainstream media. Their attention, they should give a lot more attention to human rights developments in Vietnam. The American NGO does a wonderful job of keeping track of that. But the American media, hardly even mention these problems. And so I think in order to bring pressure of public opinion all over the world, the American media should do more. And thank to Al Jazeera for at least initiating that trend. Yeah.
Well, we appreciate having guests like you on the program to get the word out. Yeah. Dan, we've been talking a little bit about how the international community is viewing Vietnam in all of this. And the U.S. has noted that what they did with the 14 prisoners seems to be inconsistent with their obligations under the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and also noted that they may be in violation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as it relates to freedom of expression. Do you see Vietnam in violation of international agreements here?
Oh, absolutely. It's absolutely clear to all of us that what they are doing right now violate all of the basic human rights as prescribed by the Universal Declaration for Human Rights, which the Vietnamese government is a signatory to that declaration.
Is there any hammer for violating that, though?
I'm sorry?
Is there any hammer? Is there any consequence, international consequence to Vietnam for violating?
Well, not yet. I mean, right now, of course, their action had been met with scrutiny and just being chastised by the international community. The condemnation from the international community, especially from the UN, so far definitely has exerted pressure on the Vietnamese government. However, we need to see more concrete action. We need to see more concrete measure that will inflict some real pressure on the Vietnamese government before we can see some real improvement.
Well, Eva, earlier you were talking about solutions and ways to get around this. One person tweeted us that activists have created a site, nofirewall.blogspot.com, that helps Vietnamese citizens get around censorship. I've opened it up here on my screen, and basically it does just what the tweet said, helping people get around this. But actually, Vic, I'd like you to talk about the fact that this is not all sites. Some things are blocked, other things aren't. Where do they draw the line? What constitutes, material that's subversive to the state?
Well, they go by the name. For instance, Viet Tân is usually blocked. But if you're talking about international radio, then sometimes they firewall RFA or the BBC or VOA, and sometimes not. So it depends on the mood or the question. For instance, before a big trial, for instance, they try to black out all mention of that, and so they might firewall that for a couple of days. But then the things resume because they don't want to have such a bad name altogether, and so it's difficult. I think we need ways to circumvent that, and I think fortunately the Vietnamese internet work user in Vietnam are very, very good at that, especially those who are IT students.
Right.
They specialize in trying to get around it. Yeah.
Speaking of circumvention, Diem, I just retweeted a tweet from your organization that says, check out our circumvention portal, tips and tools in Vietnamese. How much jeopardy are people in Vietnam in for doing something like checking out that website?
The risk is very low. You have to keep in mind that surprisingly, internet penetration in Vietnam is quite high. We estimate roughly 30 million Vietnamese do have access to the internet out of a population of 90 million. That's a third of the population. And there is no way the Vietnamese government can keep track of 30 million people, which website they have visited and so on. Yes, granted that the control is tight. However, there is just simply, they simply do not have the manpower to be able to monitor 30 million users. So people in Vietnam still can find ways to access the internet. I just want to also point out something that you mentioned a while ago. The Vietnamese government has been stepping up attacks on websites and blog sites that they consider to be subversive. They use spywares, they use hackers, they use DDoS attacks, and they target these things. So in addition firewalling some of these sites, they actually go out and attack these websites. We also have recently obtained documents showing that some of these attacks come from computers with IP addresses inside Vietnam. So it's quite clear the Vietnamese government's hands is behind all of these attacks.
Ava, you wanted to follow up?
Yes, I just wanted to make a very important point about internet surveillance. Internet surveillance, if you are an authoritarian regime that controls all of the ISPs in your country, internet surveillance is not hard. In fact, it's trivially easy and does not require a great deal of manpower. I think that internet users within Vietnam should be extremely cognizant of the possibility that their use is being surveilled and should take appropriate steps to avoid that kind of surveillance. EFF actually has a guide called Surveillance Self-Defense International on our website. I believe it is www.eff.org/SSDI. Either that or it is a link from SSD to the international site, but it has a lot of really great advice for how to avoid government surveillance if you are inside of an authoritarian regime. But that is a very real risk that people are taking, and I would not trivialize it.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I would support what Eva said. The only thing is that I also would support what Diem Do has said, is that with so many millions of people using it, there's only so many people that the police can target because they sort of think you are the suspect. But a lot of people would take things and then they send it as a private message. Then a lot of things get through without the police being aware of that. Yeah.
Diem, talk a little bit about the changes that your group is calling for.
Well, Viet Tân has always been calling for a democratic Vietnam and the rule of law and the respect for human rights. Our ultimate goal as a political organization is to establish a long-lasting and well-founded democracy in Vietnam so that everyone has an equal opportunity to contribute and to rebuild Vietnam, not just materially, but socially, morally, and culturally as well. So that's basically what we have been calling for. We believe in nonviolent, we believe in peaceful political changes. Nevertheless, the Vietnamese government still labels us a terrorist organization, but like I said, that label doesn't really stick. Nobody really believes that at all. Even the UN recently, by reacting to the trial of the 14 bloggers that you mentioned a while ago, in that reaction by the UN, they mentioned that Viet Tân is a peaceful organization, and all accusation by the Vietnamese government are just found to be just simply false.
All right. On that note, I want to thank all of our guests, Nguyen Bic, Ava Galperin, and Diem Do for joining us today. And of course, thanks to our online community for participating in the program. Now on our next show tomorrow, unpaid internships, unfair practice, or a time-honored tradition. What do you think? Send us your thoughts and your questions and comments. And until then, we'll see you online.